Welcome you all to the second Saddle Road Press reading. Um, and I think you all know this, but for those that don't, Saddle Road Press is a literary publisher that is now located in Ithaca, New York, after many years in Hilo, Hawaii. I'm Ruth Thompson, I'm the editor, and Don Mitchell is the book designer. And today we are honored to have two brilliant and original writers of queer fiction, Donald Mengay, author of The Lead to Our Undoing and Oho, and Jendi Reiter, author of Story and Two Natures. Our guest moderators for today, and I don't see Keith yet, but I will keep trying to reach him, but are Phil Terman and Keith Walker. Philip Terman is the author of My Blossoming Everything and 11 other books. The recipient of many awards and honors, he is a retired professor of creative writing and literature, the founder of the Bridge Literary Arts Center, and a beloved friend, coach, and teacher to writers throughout the literary community. Keith, who is not here yet, but I'll preface his arrival. Keith Walker grew up in North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, and South Carolina, majored in English at Wofford College, and then in New York City, he graduated from NYU in clinical social work and has been a therapist for many years. He's lived in Maine for 35 years, has been a studio potter, co-founded the Portland, Maine Zen Meditation Center, and completed the spiritual guidance program at Shalem Institute in Washington, D.C. Okay, so today I'm going to turn this over to Phil to introduce our authors. And Phil? Oh, wait,
Okay,
I think
sure.
I think Keith is just coming in now. So
There he is.
here he is. Okay.
Okay. I can
Hi.
introduce Todd. Keith was going to, but now that he's here, maybe he should. Or it doesn't matter. But it's great
I
to be with you.
introduced you, Keith. So
Hi, Keith.
Oh, I apologize for the technical difficulties on my end. I've been having internet connectivity issues today. It was working earlier, and of course, when I come back, that's when I have a
yep,
trouble. So,
yeah,
so I apologize, but I finally got it, and here I am. So I'm glad to be here with everyone. So.
Would you
great.
like to introduce Donald, Keith, or think
Ye-
we?
Yes, absolutely. I'd love to introduce Donald
Oh,
and Donald.
both of us would love to introduce you, Donald, but
My my
Keith
apologies.
won the coin toss. So
My apologies for keeping you in suspense. But yes, it would be my honor to introduce Donald, and I will just open up my window here where I have all that good information, and we'll do so. Um, So, Don Mengay is going to be reading today from his second novel, and it's actually in part of a trilogy. And uh, so, Don is part of the growing Saddle Road Press family, and again, I apologize. I'm just gonna take me 1 second to get myself together here. I've been struggling to get online, so I don't have all my information as that I was trying to get together at the same time I was trying to resolve my crisis here. Um, so give me just one moment.
we love high tech, don't we?
Oh, well, I apologize. I'm You
We've had
usually
that
it
going
works,
on
but
for weeks
sometimes
and weeks and weeks. It
it
was just
doesn't.
awful.
Um,
Keith, if you're having problem, I have it right here. So if you want
you
to,
do okay. Well, if you would, that would be wonderful. I
your
appreciate
your technical problems is my fortune.
it. Well, thank you for
Okay, all right. Donald Mengay was born, and as we know, born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, the wonderful, not mistake on the lake, where he worked in a factory. I'm wondering what factory he worked in, by the way.
It was, oh my goodness, it's, oh God, the name has already just gone out of my head.
By
I
that,
can't believe it. I worked there for 3 years making tin cans. Yeah.
but I also worked in a factory, but I can't remember the name in Cleveland, and we made toilet wrenches,
Oh,
whatever that
wow. It's like Lefferts or something like that. Lynn, do you remember?
that no.
I
I
met my sister. She's on here. I wonder if she remembers.
can't. It
No,
was
she doesn't. All
one of
right.
us now. Both of us are writers now, and we can't remember the factory we were.
Exactly, exactly. It'll
So,
come to me as soon as this ends.
but then he got smart and he moved to Denver and earned his master's in English from Denver University, DU, right?
Hmm.
Followed by a PhD in Comp Lit from NYU, which is where Keith went. For over 30 years, he taught queer and post-humanist lit at City University of New York, as well as English lit at the University of Paris, for which I'm very jealous. Um, he published articles of queer criticism in journals, including Genders, Genre, and Minnesota University Press, among others. He began writing fiction in the early 1990s. The Lead to Undoing was published by the phenomenal Saddle Road Press and was his debut novel, followed by Ojo, also with Saddle Road Press, as Keith mentioned. It's the second novel in a trilogy, proposed trilogy, which is amazing. I can't even imagine writing one novel, let alone a trilogy of three. And he just completed his third novel, Bare Life, entitled Bare Not Life, with three works that comprise the El Dorado trilogy. You could have a whole big umbrella name like I don't know, like the Divine Comedy or something like that.
Like that.
We're in that, but we're very fortunate. If I've read selections from the first novel and second novel, and really want to read all of them. So thank you for being here and take it away.
I will. Thank you so much. And I want to start by expressing my endless gratitude to Ruth and Don for making this possible from the beginning, from every aspect of this process to today. And I am just so darn grateful. And I'll just, they say don't start with explanation, but I am going to give a little overview. Um, and say that also I want to thank Keith and Phil too for being part of this series and emceeing it. But what I want to say about the trilogy is after teaching queer lit for, gosh, almost 40 years, I was incredibly aware of the fact that most of the queer lit out there is coastal. There's very little about working class and middle America out there that deals with queer lifestyles and queer sensibilities. And so the entire trilogy is basically about that. And I sort of wrote the books that I always wanted to read, to be quite honest, because I always found other people's lives who had a lot more money and a lot more means and a lot more than I had growing up. So I the lead really is a story about finding love in the closet, basically, back in the 70s, and how difficult that was the suburb I grew up in was sort of like MAGA America before MAGA had a name. And and so I kind of wanted to talk about it, and there were several attempts the main character's name is Jake, and he tries one time with a guy paradoxically named Romeo, and that turns out to be a bust. And then finally, he finds love with a young guy named Picote, who is a Native American youth and also a born again. And trouble ensues, shall we say? And so, I actually want to start with the lead and read a short little excerpt from there. And the last reading we had was ended on with love poetry, and I sort of want to start with a love scene here. And after much looking and much difficulty, Jake finally connects with Pico, and it's awkward, shall we say? They don't know what they're doing. It's like being on Mars. So, and I'll just also say this, that the novel is narrated by not just a dog but a dead dog, and we can talk about why it's a dog and why it's a dead dog. But I'll just say that Molly witnesses everything. She's the dog, and Molly witnesses everything. And here she is laying on a bed in a love hotel on Chester Avenue in downtown Cleveland, and she's watching everything, and she's sort of putting herself in their position, as all narrators do, right? She's exhibiting the art of narration, shall we say. I'm in their heads, their bodies, the fever of flesh against flesh, even in this unheated space with its lazy register. Its 50s style windows with aluminum frames that let in the winds, encouraging the press of our bodies, my skin against the skin of my brave here. He and I are on a search party of some kind. Trembling and vulnerable in the chilly air, I tug the sheet from between the mattress and box springs and slip under, tenting it and inviting Picote in. He wastes no time, and the world is reversed, him on top of me. The mix of tongues in two registers, mouthing words and gestures both. The arms restless, legs jigging, the forwardness of the language, languages plural, the physical polyglossia, two babbling, B-A-B-B-L-I-N-G, and babbling, B-A-B-E-L-I-N-G, at the same time, but understanding somehow the novelty of it, the push and pull, the do-si-do your partner around the dance floor, around this train station on Mars, do-si-doing around the place on a horizontal plane. Two novices learning the steps. Two virgins, truth be told. Two races, invoking the jocular and not so jocular jibes to Picote's face from the others at the plant. The derision that escaped Romeo's lips behind his back once he learned the meaning of the dark eyes. And now the two of us, the bedding in a mess completely. Could anything cool this heat under the sheets? Some dance more slowly than others, I'm learning. Having said that, some are better equipped to pull it off, between the ears, at the core, and outer limbs. Character, too, like the character penetrating me, the talk turned guttural, swatch of velvet and blade of titanium, easy glide and hard friction, sear and slippery, shaggy and sleek, pink and blue. So now I'll switch to Ohol. Things go bad, shall we say, for Jake and Picote. Picote meets his demise not long after this scene. And I won't say how, I'll leave it to you to read and figure out what happened, but things do go badly. And as a result of the trauma of losing the one person in his, not one person, but the one person that he was able to find finally after such a long search, he hightails it out of the Forest City or Cleveland, and he, like Huck, he lights west. And so he moves to a completely different world that he knows absolutely nothing about. He just gets in his car, throws some things in the back, and starts driving. So this picks up, shall we say, in the middle of nowhere, which is really a little Rocky Mountain town that he finally decides to stay in. This is about one of the towns called Pandemonium. Rolling toward Pandemonium, spruces meet where mountains angle up. Even traveling at 60, you catch hummingbirds wheeling by, whistling on a flight to Chihuahua or Point South, where the sun dangles in the sky. Where the highway turns true, my foot eases the gas, having a mind of its own. How many times do I pulled aside to take in this view, stick still, only to be deflated, as though standing were the best way to ruin a thing. Sometimes the best prospects present only at speed. Stop and they vanish. Track on and they maintain. Spark awe as you shoosh by. Not unlike a bighorn. So long as you avert your gaze, you're good. But a bare naked glance and it scats away. What does the forest city offer compared to this? How could Harry or Flory, that's Jake's parents, conceive it? A ground of giants rising up toward a different god than the one they worship. The sight lines slope to this stand of pines, thick as pubic hair, exuding earth. The terrain offers company only when you can't suffer your own another day. No driver tails or hassles you at the moment, lays on their horn to shake you. When you slow down, the world deaccelerates too. It vanishes. I hit the pedal, though I have nowhere to go. I'm driving, anywhere but east. The problem is, when you commit yourself to a goal, including never to set one, when you give up looking, searching, discovering, or uncovering, finding, locating, or advancing, growing, or God forbid, improving. When you get it together enough to decide all that, you still got to keep going, it turns out, because an object without motion is dead. Dead, dead, dead. Even a rock lives, rising and falling with earth. It tells a story of heat and cold, lichens. Accordingly, if you harbor a rock in your chest, devoid of will, drive, or purpose, it too is prey to circumstance. Never mind time and its twists. If these rocks here were to have a will, say to suck in this view, whiff this crotch of furs, if it'd be possible only because it's the nature of things. They've been doing it longer than me, looking. As the Fiat rattles on, Harry eyes me, him and Flory both, two passengers who haven't stopped tracking me since I left. I've been trying to lose them for over 1,400 miles since I left Laurentine, but every time I glance back, they're there in the rear view. Harry and Flory have been dogging me the whole way. You'd think once you took leave, no would mean no, that they'd get the message that I don't want them in my life and back off. But the two hang there, as though they had a bevy of cells to split. If life were the way it is in books, I'd turn into a lark, flit out of here. But things remain stubbornly the same. Eyes take a position as I signal toward the pandemonium exit. Harry and Flory, Rauch and Marx, Sin and Diablo, perch where once a welter of things jumbled around, junk I snatched at the last minute. Pico, a corpse coughed by the lake, leathery and worn, slumps next to me. I adjust the mirror so I can't see the crowd in the back. I'm not much good at gazing forward either, as it turns out. It feels I'm riding a momentum bigger than me. All that vanishes, though as I take in the leafy streets of pandemonium, rolled in a symmetry, a geometry that must have come from a will to tame the rudeness of the valley where the town rests. They threw a net over nature to subdue it. It wilted, but in a half-assed way. The gentle grid only roughly domesticates the place, overlays it with a veneer of order after the raucous early days on the heels of a rush. It's dotted with gingerbread now, rows of houses that gather on a road stretching unpaved from one side of the valley to the other. The goal a century on seems to be formaldehyding the past here, after the insanity of the early days when it was a lawless gathering of tents, just like the other towns nearby, including Ojo Caliente, where I live, but in a different way, having opted for a more respectable look. Here in Pandemonium, evidence of a constant turning back smacks you in the face, not just in the houses, but the post office, town hall, and clinic, the Hotel de Paris, grade school, jail, hardware and liquor stores, Bars, eateries, churches, and cafes. 4 churches and 10 cafes to be exact, for a town of 800. A storybook village whose founders lie unmissed, unloved, and unknown in Alvarado Cemetery, just a piece down Frontage Road. A cousin of Ojo, there's no Safeway, no golden arches, or 10-gallon neon rotating over a steakhouse, no motels luring drivers off I-70. There are no tin cans like the one I call home, no rock shops just across, no defunct mines bilking tourists panning for gold. On foot, pandemonium opens as you trod the pavers. They must date back to the time the cornerstone was set. Part of an effort to lift souls, S-O-L-E-S, from vulgar earth, elevate souls, S-O-U-L-S, above the devil wilderness. Up from mud, with its knack for tagging every cuff, hem, and seam, smudges that must have reminded them of their fate one day. The brazen goal was to lose the earth and in some way feminize it, given the frou-frou everywhere. If men wrangled the rowdiness that was here originally, pinned it into submission, held it at gunpoint, women delivered another blow with the proliferation of ornaments everywhere you look, including the copper tricks holding up the bar just there. I take it in, shops and wares, hand-wheeled crockery, the colored glass, crystals diffusing light, silver and turquoise displays, kiosks of seeds, columbine, Indian paintbrush, and edelweiss, hummingbird feeders in unnatural reds, hyped hues, too, in paintings on gallery walls, photos of this or that peak, ambered in light. Tables inside the happy looker, a line in tight rows, inside and out, an effort to pack them in. The whiff of corn oil and waffle batter crisping. Fairies wheel overhead, whistle while beelining to plastic blooms under the looker's eave. How is it possible such a trifle can thrive under the borders of beyond the borders of the town, in air so harsh, so vertical? How do they escape raptors, daughters of dinosaurs, spiraling on thermals overhead, craning to make a kill? 2 hummingbirds buzz by, buzz each other, then part until they rush each other again. It's difficult to tell if they're mating on the wing or warring for nectar. The lacy columbine, how does it do it? A shaky vulnerability, braving spaces where giants step. Everything here's named in its honor. Streets and churches, emporiums, inns and restaurants, a flouncy, showy gaiety that muscles its way through the culture. I'm struggling to hang on till noon. After 3/4 of an hour, drifting through side streets, I return to Maine. The sun emerges from its closet finally. I catch the pre-glow over the crest. At the filling station on the edge of town, I contemplate how for 1,400 miles I pressed on in search of a thing I couldn't name, visualize, or hear echo back. I simply drove until I couldn't catch the whites of the eyes following me. It wasn't until I ramped toward Ojo that I saw nothing but stuff in the back. Junk, really, and books, effects you throw in your car on the run. By the time I reached Ojo, that was all I saw, so I stopped, where eyes no longer followed. For a few days at least, maybe even a week. I didn't know zombies need time to catch up. They track you, no matter what, make you think they're gone, only to reemerge as they did this morning, just as I was beginning to think I could get through a day without those hangers on. They look more than a touch out of their element here, like they're from Mars. There, or Laurentine. As I pile into the Fiat, I realize they split up while I was harassed by the church guy. They toured the place, but now are reconvening in their usual spots, there in the back. There's Diablo, of all people, and Sin, perennially holding Diablo's hand. Here's Romeo, drawing his usual puss. Harry and Florrie press together as they scoot the others over, and there pouts Peacoat, perching in position beside me, eyes yellow and vitreous, trained on me silently, the deathly skin, waterlogged, army issue jacket, and ghastly look. Weren't nothing I could have done, I plead. Billy told me to get lost and you bid me go. He stares at me without blinking the way the living dead do, a look of unguarded vulnerability, blaming me while the vehicle fills with water, enough to drown the lot of us. The others disappear and it's just me and Peacoat now in a viscous flow, the two of us below the surface. I'm shifting with him toward the open lake, drifting like perch through the frigid medium, dead leaves and branches, vegetable rot fertilizing the water, rotting us too, our dreams. If I'd have known what was about to go down, I never would have left. I promise. Peacoat stares blankly back, a wounded puppy, so unlike the gaze that locked on me in that room on Chester. I want to dwell on that moment, the thrill of it in our living days, so unlike this, when it seems we're both lilting toward, only he knows for sure. We were in the process of filling a prescription for what ailed us, in a room named Possibility. Florrie reappears and opens the back door of the Fiat from outside. Erie water drains, and the others pile back in, resume the positions they had the whole trip. We head west. Emerging from Eisenhower Tunnel, birth canal of a range, transecting the terrain from north to south, I eye the Continental Divide skirting the rear view. Emerging is difficult. I squint into light. The sun slaps you into breathing, offers little hope of adjusting as you issue from safety to vulnerability. I wasn't expecting to be born this way, thrust to the other side. For all intents and purposes, I've come out alone. The living dead, look, have abandoned me again, somewhere in the blackness behind. Who knows how long it'll last, but for now, I'm free. I'll end there.
Wow, thank you so much
Thank you.
for that journey. Details are amazing.
Thank you.
But we will move on because the two of them wanted to just go right after each other and then have a discussion. And I should have said earlier that if you have any questions or comments, we do have a chat here. A couple people put something up on chat. And maybe as they occur to you, perhaps maybe save them because we might have some discussion at the end or some questions or that kind of thing. So it's hard to remember sometimes after a while. So for me anyway. So thank you so much for that, Don. That was really, really powerful.
Thank you.
Jendi, can you all hear me okay? Yeah. All right.
Yes.
Jendi Reiter? Am I getting that right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. Is the author of the novels To Nature and Origin Story, both from the great Saddle Road Press, the story collection, and an incomplete list of my wishes. Love that title. From Sunshot Press, and 5 poetry books and chapbooks. Most recently, Made Man from Little Red Tree Publishing. Writes poetry and fiction. I'm jealous. I could write more than one genre. They're the editor of winningwriters.com. And I'll put that in the chat too, because that is an incredible resource that Jendi does. It's a resource site with contests and markets for creative writers. And I'm always impressed and just grateful for writers who do more than write, but also do editing and publishing and support other writers, just like our friend Ruth Thompson does. Is a wonderful poet, but also an incredible publisher, as we all know. But I really appreciate that, Jendi, that's got to take a lot of energy and time.
Thank you so much. Yes. Well, Winning Writers is a labor of love between me and my partner, just like Don and Ruth do Saddle Road Press. Adam and I have been doing Winning Writers since 2001. And Ruth and I actually found each other because she's a subscriber to Winning Writers and sent me news of her poetry book. And then we just became literary friends. And, then I had a novel and she's like, oh, we're publishing novels. And here we are. So Winning Writers, I'm not just the president, I'm also a satisfied customer, as the old ad used to say. Although I'm actually not the president, I'm the vice president. I thought Adam would be the president and meaning he'd do more work, but it didn't work out that way. We both work pretty hard.
Presidents are very much in the news these days. So,
Yes, that's true. That's right. Well, thank you for having me in this
But
series.
I just want to say that's a great example of why, we need people like you to have these kinds of writing organizations and opportunities, because you make connections and interconnections. And here you are because Ruth and you made that connection on your particular your particular passion. So that's really credible. I just want to say that I just want to give a quote from that was on Goodreads for Origin Story. Remy Ricci, I think, said, "I've never read a book quite like Origin Story, set against the backdrop of the AIDS epidemic and theological problems. Like the Binding of Isaac, the novel pulls the reader into a deep, uncertain landscape. Origin Story is wonderfully complex and explosive, and while it resists a fairy tale ending, it offers something better than closure. It offers hope and glimpse of how things ought to be," which is kind of a cool thing to have said about
Yeah.
your. And what I've read about the book is really phenomenal. I just was very much engrossed and engaged. So, looking forward to your reading, Jen.
Thank you so much. It's really great to be part of the Saddle Road family. As anyone who's been published for them knows, you're just great folks, and it's a nice community. I'm really grateful for your support of our books and the beautiful book design by Don Mitchell. Da, da, da. So anyway, so Origin Story is set in New York City in the mid 90s, and it's a standalone sequel to Natures. And it's about Peter Edelman, who is kind of a jack of all trades at this point. He's in his mid 20s, and he's working as a yoga instructor. He's had a political career that didn't really pan out, and he's working right now for his mom, Barbara, who's a social worker who runs a foster home for teens in the foster care system, a lot of queer teens. And so he doesn't really want to do any of those things. He really wants to be a comic book writer. And his loving partner, Julian, is kind of an opposites attract guy. He's a flamboyant Southern fashion photographer. And he's always trying to encourage Peter to do things for himself instead of just for other people. So in the chapter I'm going to read, they're spending a little time together. Peter and Julian have just moved in together a few months ago. And Peter's family is very liberal, but they're dysfunctional. And Julian's family is very conservative and even more dysfunctional. So compared to Julian's family, he thinks Peter's family is awesome, and Peter's like, no. So that's where we end up here. So reading glass. Okay. So this is like late February or early March, 1997. What did Dad say was so important that we have to give up the first nice Sunday in like months? I fetched. Julian pulled his cashmere scarf higher. This is nice weather to you, Yankees? How sad. Come on, it's 40 degrees out. The sky is blue, well, mostly, and we haven't both had a weekend off in so long. We could have gone rollerblading, cooked brunch together. I don't know. What are couples supposed to do when they're not working or fucking? Watch sports? Buy napkins at Gracious Home? Whatever you want, darling. I've never had a normal relationship. Everyone in New York seems to be in their own private time zone. I pushed his arm playfully. To hear you talk, you'd think you hadn't been living here for almost 7 years. Yeah, funny about that. It's what I dreamed of when I was a tragically cool kid in the suburbs, but sometimes I wish it would just slow down. We don't have to go to whatever this is today. I stopped short, causing a hiccup in the pedestrian flow along West 14th Street. Look, there's a Goodwill. I have a sudden urge to buy something with zippers all over it. Help me make good choices. Reliable as a cat when it hears the electric can opener, Jewel pivoted, but then shook his head. 10 minutes tops, okay? Ada was pretty insistent. She called me like 4 times in a row. Oh, geez, this was Ada's idea? You should have said so. I'd have bought a crash helmet or a ticket to Timbuktu. For someone who works with mental teenagers, you're pretty freaked out by your stepmama. Is she actually evil? Or just, one of those madcap jazz age characters who dances on tabletops? Ada annoys me because she's all energy and no substance, like a sandstorm. You're going along your way when this force out of nowhere sweeps you up, spins you around, and drops you into a glittering oasis that always turns out to be a dry heap of dirt. I know the feeling. Who are you talking about? Most people, actually. But it's illegal to marry dogs, so we learn to live with our disappointing species. Come on, let me buy you something before we go. Can you find me a leather collar? He reached up and patted my head. I promise. We'll cut through Christopher Street on our way home. I was not a very good dog. I wasn't loyal, obedient, or purebred, though I could be persuaded to wear a leash and a muzzle. As Jewel went to pay for something he wouldn't show me, I practiced the anti-stress tricks I'd been learning from weekly sessions with Sid. Savor 3 deep breaths. Count backwards by tens. Feel my feet on the floor. Remember where I am. It's safe here. Maybe Julian was right that I dwelled too much on the helpless chaos of the past. Holding grudges was the Jewish version of mindfulness, an outdated survival skill from 40 years in the desert with no signposts except the mirage of how things ought to be. I had a real future to aim for instead. The terrifying time slippages had stopped since I went on the anxiety meds. They made me feel a little bloated, small price to pay, but another reason to be grumpy that Jewel and I couldn't spend today doing something vigorous. We both made an extra effort to be cheerful to each other for the remainder of our walk. I figured something about his family had put him in a sour mood, so he was hoping to play house with Nathan and Ada. Jewel came off bitchy a lot of the time because he was so sentimental underneath. He pretended to despise his father, though not enough to air his dirty laundry to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. But deep down, he wanted that Hollywood ending where tragic flaws become lovable quirks and everyone realizes they need each other. He'd never admit it, but I could tell from the shows we watched. The guy never missed a Dickens episode on Masterpiece Theater. Living with someone reveals a lot of odd surprises. I'm interested in the costumes, was the Julian version of reading Playboy for the articles. At the door of Nathan's brownstone, I rehearsed my new attitude. Accept people for who they are, even people who might flip from Tigger to Eeyore mid-sentence. Live in the present. Nothing else is real. All these good intentions flew straight down the road to you-know-where when Ada opened the door and a crowd behind her yelled at me, "Surprise! Happy birthday!" My heartbeat choked me and my body felt numb. For a moment, I couldn't distinguish the faces in the room. A party horn strangled bleat, popping balloons, and the lurching start of inevitably off-key singing blended into a rush of noise. The tremor in my leg turned out to be my pager vibrating. Everyone wanted a piece of me at the same time as usual. I didn't look at the screen. Instead, I shot daggers at Julian. Had he been in on the plot? Didn't he know me at all? Jewel also looked surprised and irritated at me of all people, which he quickly covered up with a big smile at our hostess. Ada adjusted her paper Star Wars party hat and hurried into the living room, where a dozen members of our extended family prepared to slice into Darth Vader's buttercream frosted head. I drew in a deep breath, preparing to extinguish his crown of candles, thinking that my only wish was to get through the day without murdering someone, which was maybe not Darth's specialty. A feeling of defeat made my eyes prickle. I craved Julian's touch to reassure me that I was his mutt and I didn't have to win a show ribbon for anybody. But he was apparently mad about something that I didn't have the strength to care about. Also, I kind of wanted some cake. So I sighed, gathered another breath, let its power swell my chest, and blasted out my silent will to the universe. I want to be heard. And so did my pager, which buzzed against my hip a second time. I stole a glance while Ada was busy passing plates of cake. Mom's number. We'd had a quiet lunch 2 days ago on my real birthday, agreeing not to make a fuss about it in front of our Gateway House kids who could have complicated feelings about family celebrations, as did I. A burger at Big Nick's and a gift certificate to Tower Records were more than enough for me, Mom knew. So this call was probably work-related. As a freelancer who traveled a lot, Jewel had given in to the craze for the new Motorola mobile phones. But I wasn't ready for the on-call lifestyle. I pulled him aside from refereeing a debate between Dad and Cousin Ben about the O.J. Simpson acquittal. I only had to overhear a few words to know Nathan would come down on the side of correct procedure, Ben on the side of correct results. Less filling, tastes great. Meanwhile, the dead stayed dead. Babe, can I borrow your phone? Emergency at Gateway. What else is new? He tossed it to me. I locked myself in the bathroom, the only quiet spot downstairs. Mom's phone in her Gateway office forwarded to the weekend intake security guy's desk after 6 rings. He said I should meet her at the Natural History Museum as soon as possible. It was a popular spot for our foster kids' family outings, since it was on our subway line and housed many gross and scary marvels to delight the toughest boys. The desk duty guy wasn't authorized to give details, but I assumed a supervised visit had gone sour. Julian was waiting for me in the hallway, mimosa glass in hand. Hey, party boy, you're missing out on Goth Pictionary. Ada just tried to draw Freddy Krueger. I motioned for him to hand over the drink and took a gulp. You're having a good time? Should I not be? You should have told me this was happening. Dummy, how would I have known when someone doesn't even bother to tell me it's his birthday? So that explains his bad attitude. I don't like making a big Megillah about it. Sometimes it always winds up being about other people's feelings instead of mine. Is there ever going to be an okay way to do something nice for you? I buy you clothes, you complain I'm trying to change you. I play diplomat with your family, you act like I'm disloyal. Do you just want to be alone? No, I want to be with you, just you. Sweating, my heart racing, I craved another pill, but it was too soon. Julian let me put my arms around him. How could he not see that this was enough for me? Not presents, not the spotlight, only his centering touch. But please don't hate me. I have to duck out now. Sounds like a foster family visit went sideways. Not like this one. Jewel pulled away. I'm sorry. He put on his party face again, the resilient smile that reminded me of his mother. Do what you gotta do, Batman. But you know, for a guy who claims to crave independence, you keep choosing jobs where someone else snaps their fingers and you jump. The museum entrance on Central Park West was mobbed, as was typical for the weekends. Children clambered over the triumphal bronze statue of Teddy Roosevelt on horseback, followed by servile Indians. I needed a breather before I tackled the line at the information desk to see if Mom had left me a message about our meetup spot. As I'd done so many times over the years, I sought out the quiet dimness of the Hall of Birds, drifting back into the 19th century civic majesty of polished marble floors and wide glass diorama windows. Nothing changed in these portals to unspoiled worlds, not since my 1970s childhood, not since the age of the great white hunter scientists who had shot, preserved, and restrung these birds in unending flight against a painted blue sky. My falcons were still there, nesting on a sheer cliffside of the Palisades above the Hudson River. 3 scruffy chicks and a scatter of prey bones, the mother diving down with fresh meat. Impossible not to feel a slight imaginary breeze, the vertigo of real distances. My breath in and out expanded into peace. This was always your favorite spot. I jumped at the voice behind me. My mother rose from her bench on the side wall, tucking into her handbag the paperback she'd been reading to pass the time. This also was too much like the old days. Me lost in a telepathic conversation with lumps of sawdust and feathers. Mom deep into a Jewish immigrant saga by Howard Fast or Belva Plain. Mom, where's the fire? No fire. Your father's wife is plotting a surprise party for you. Can you believe it? And I knew you'd want to get out of it, but you'd feel guilty unless you thought it was a work emergency. That was evil, Mom. But true, I sighed. But true. Julian's going to be so pissed at me. I left him all alone there to play pin the tail on Chewbacca. Oh, you went already? I tried to warn you, but I guess you and your boyfriend sleep so late you don't answer the phone. That was indeed an accurate euphemism for the morning routine in the new Selkirk Edelman household. My cheeks reddened. I'm surprised Ada invited you. I mean, surprised in a good way. Jewel thinks it's time we all got over it. Is that okay to say? Mom sniffed. I'm over it. That doesn't mean I have to sit around and have cocktails with the two of them, like one of those wife swapping Martian novels you used to read. I snickered when I got the reference. Oh, right, Heinlein, Stranger in a Strange Land. It was strange, all right. Ah, well, I guess mothers can't be expected to understand all of their children's interests. You understand me pretty well. She smiled and patted my back. Do you forgive me for finagling you here? Maybe you don't want to stay? No, what's done is done. I'd look dumb if I went back now. Let's pay our respects to the grizzly bears. We strolled through the monumental halls of taxidermy devoted to North American mammals. At the water fountain by the elevator, I gulped my anti-anxiety pill, but not fast enough to dodge Mom's notice. She must have honed her observation skills catching the gateway kids with contraband. What's that? Are you sick? I tried to be charitable about her prying. Everyone who loves someone gay in these plague years developed a certain paranoia at the sight of mystery meds. I'm fine, just stressed. My new therapist prescribed these to help me calm down and get back on track. Mom hugged me a little too long. It was kind of embarrassing at my age, but what could I do? When the elevator door opened, I stepped away and wedged myself on the other side of a woman's baby carriage. The gemstones and minerals rooms were even darker and quieter than the bird tableau. Tourists unconsciously hushed, as though in a cave or church. Narrow pathways led between vertical glass cases, where crystals of misty pink quartz and glittering fool's gold bloomed from rough chunks of rock. I didn't think I'd ever outgrow the wish to touch them, to join my body to the earth's magic that city's cement and asphalt kept at a distance. I caught up with my mother in her usual place, adoring the outsized star sapphire and diamond necklaces on velvet. Instead of popping those pills, maybe you should stop working so many jobs. You're always running from gateway to your gym classes and back again. Even when you're not at work, it's hard to get a hold of you. No wonder you're anxious. As Mama used to say, you can't dance at 2 weddings. 3, actually. Those hours when I didn't pick up the phone. More often than not, I was writing or looking for places to sell the poison cure, as the comic book that he's writing. When the happy pills and deep breathing failed, when I gasped awake at 2 a.m. and gazed at my naked, sated lover sleeping soundly beside me, the only thing that stopped me from rushing out to Bernie's dungeon to be whipped into guilty oblivion was to pick up a pencil and my storyboard sketchpad and write furiously on the couch till I conked out. What can I do? I need the money. I've got a fancy man now who likes his vodka and cufflinks. Does he really? No, I'm kidding. Jewel would totally support me if I asked. I'd feel bad not pulling my own weight. I'm sorry we can't pay you more, boy chick. Our year-end report just came back from the accountants and those schmoes in Washington, I don't care if they're Democrats or Republicans. They all think welfare is a dirty word. She cast a longing glance at the sparkling ropes of gems behind glass. Too bad you're not a jewel thief. Maybe in the next comic book, Robin Hood and his mom. She laughed. It's the kids I feel bad for, not so much the parents. They made their bed, but someone else always has to pay. I will leave it there. Thank you so much.
You should unmute. Everybody should unmute so we can hear the applause.
Yeah.
You see.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, any reactions, any questions, any responses? Now's a good time to.
Yeah, the two of you, talking together was, I'd really be interested in hearing you talk.
I would love to say how much I enjoyed hearing Jendi breathe life into that text. I read the whole thing and I loved it, and I got the humor. But Jendi, when you read it, it just it just flows out. It's a very, very, very humorous, which I really greatly enjoyed.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to make a couple other observations, and that is one that we didn't plan in advance on both wearing prints today.
I was thinking that. we look alike.
But the thing we do. But the thing is, it's interesting. The way where I hadn't read your work before, and just to see the way that the two works are really talking to each other, and also my Oho gets to some campy elements later on, but I so enjoyed the camp in that passage there. And we know, right? It's basic Esther Newton about the value of camp and how subversive camp is, and how it overturns gender norms and does so many things. There can be a really sort of a negative side to camp, but the better side of camp is exactly what you're doing there, which is, really being wonderfully satirical.
Thank you. I love the humor in Oho as well. And they're the two, like, we don't even have to categorize them, which is something I also thought was pretty interesting about the world you create. That later on in Oho, for those who haven't read it, Jake and his Latino lover Tommy meet Tommy's roommates, who are, trans feminine in some way. We might call them trans women, we might call them drag queens,
Right.
but they really read read Jake for Phil with all of his Midwestern naivete and lack of fashion sense, and like cruel but loving. Like their sharp tongues are because they care, and they're just, their voices are such a great part of this book, which depends, I think, so much on voice. uh, your book, when I was thinking of questions to ask you, I was thinking about what the experience of reading your book was like, and it was like overhearing conversations.
Oh, wow.
It was like, for me, being on a journey where you hear people talking on the train and you don't know who they're talking about, but you're so interested by the way they're talking about it that you start to listen to them through the whole conversation, and then eventually pick up what's happening. It had that very oral quality to it that was really immersive.
Well, and the same is true for your book. And another thing I would like to thank Ruth and Don for is the fact that they were willing to choose works that are structurally complex and nothing like the Big Five would demand, where the reader would sue after the first page when they didn't understand exactly what was going on, exactly who knew what, and so forth. Um, I really believe that plot is one element in a narrative text, but so is language, and the language in your novel, Jendi, really really spoke to me. And speaking of overturning gender norms and enjoying that element of a text, I got the same one about so many of your characters, especially Ty. I wondered if you would say something about the character of Ty, who I just related to in so many ways. And I also want to add that one of the reasons why I wanted to add some version of a trans character in my novel, I guess you could call them drag queens, but more than that, is because drag queens are the ones who rioted at Stonewall, right? They're the ones, there would not be a queer rights movement that we know today if it was not for all those drag queens who told the police, this is it, we're not taking it anymore. And that bred a whole movement, and everything we have today, all the alphabet that the right wing is so, I'll just say, sort of crazy about or insane about, really came from that moment. It comes from that sort of trans moment from my perspective. So I wondered if you could talk about Ty a little bit.
Sure. And amen to what you just said. It makes me so angry when other folks in the LGBTQ plus community either try to split themselves off or are vulnerable to being divided from the less quote unquote respectable or binary members of our community.
Right.
And Ty, aka Tyler, is a Black Hispanic teen in the group home that Peter is working at, and uses he and she alternatingly, because you didn't do they pronouns in the 1990s, would now be considered probably gender fluid or gender queer, or one of my developmental readers read Ty as a trans femme, or a budding trans femme. But at the moment, when Peter and his mother Barbara meet Ty, he is a teenager who has a female persona called Ty,
Mm-hmm.
and considers that equally part of himself or herself. And the social workers all think it's like a trauma response and a split personality, and are pathologizing it and kind of coercing Ty not to be the female side. And
Mm-hmm.
Peter is supportive, but wonders if that's because he himself has a split personality, because Peter's journey in this book is about uncovering repressed memories of trauma and feeling like he can't be genuine with anybody and get close to anybody completely, that he has to split himself off to protect himself. So he's like, do I identify with Ty because I'm also messed up in the head, or are we both groping towards a truth that there's no room for in my mother's life?
Wow. Very nice. And it's interesting in a world in which, at least here in New Mexico, the Republicans are using transphobia as a means of drumming up votes. Sort of what Bush did in 2004 in scaring people about gay marriage. They're doing the same with trans folk now, and anyway, so it's just I feel so strongly that there need to be trans characters out there. And actually, in Bare Life, I have several trans characters, and the novel is actually narrated by a trans character. Just because I feel like we all need to be allies. Everyone needs to be allies. As Eve Sedgwick said, we're all queer in the sense, to the degree that we are allies with people who really are being singled out nowadays.
Yeah. I mean, when
I'm
you
so
say
looking
that,
forward to
you're
reading
saying,
that.
you're saying we're all human because we're all,
Exactly that.
yeah.
That's exactly right. And we're all different, right? In some ways, I think that's the point. Is it's about embracing difference.
Yeah. I like that about the fluidity of identity in Oho, that it seemed as though there was just one big queer community in Oho. Not that people were siloed the way sometimes we have the temptation to be now, because we have all these different identity options and all these different communities. We can kind of self-segregate a little more.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas in Oho, it felt like there was just this wonderful kind of absurd surprise of queerness all everywhere you looked, but it wasn't like different communities, it was all together. The guy who's the preacher is also cruising him and also has a wife who's got a lesbian book group basically. And it's like they seem like the most mainstream small town Christian straight people, but they're so not. But they're all part of one community. And I was just wondering, is that kind of a utopian fantasy, or is that what queer life was more like in the communities that you were in the 80s?
Well, I wanted to, in a way, my inspiration there was Toni Morrison, who, as we know, refuses to write white people into her novels just to please a white readership. And I feel strongly that people need to know about the world, not just that I live in, but queer people exist in. There was a little Proust too, in the Memories of Things Past. It seems like everybody's straight at the beginning of those 3 volumes, or not 3 volumes, 7 volumes, but he queerifies the entire world, right? So that by the end, everybody is queer. And as Freud said, if it weren't for culture, we would all be bisexual, basically, right? Or we would all be fluid. I think he didn't have the word fluid back then, but I think that was his idea, and it was a political choice, definitely, to in a way humanize characters, to do exactly what Ruth was saying, and that is to say they're all human. That's what matters here, is we're talking human beings with human feelings. And at a certain point in my life, I started looking at people, women in New York with, what's it called? Where just the eyes are showing. Oh, what's it called?
Oh, the
The
burqa? The burqa?
the burqa, yeah, the burqa. How we know, right? What New York is, how it's the most democratic. The New York subway is the most democratic space on the planet, and you get every kind of life on there, including animal life. And so, at a certain point on the subway, I started looking at everyone on the train and saying, "You and me, we're one. We're one. You and I are one," including the eyes that were looking at me from behind the burqa. And I wanted that somehow to come across in Ojo. And by the way, Ojo means eye, right? It means eye in Spanish. And so I wanted it to be about the way we not just us, but animals all have eyes and communicate that way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Jendi, I wondered if you could talk too, and it struck me yet again in your reading today, if you could talk too about your relationship to popular culture and cultural references, which, um, wow, really fill out that reading. It just, it's almost like, like watching Jeopardy in a way. We could have several Jeopardy shows based on your novel alone, with all those references. And I wondered if you could talk about that sort of commitment, really, because so many writers shy away from popular culture. The only one I know who goes for it like you is Salman Rushdie, and Rushdie is so immersed, right, in a historical moment, in a single historical moment that he wants to, in a way, enshrine for his reader, right? So I wondered if you could talk about that.
Oh, thank you. I'm honored by the comparison. When I first started working with Julian and Peter, almost 20 years ago, which is kind of frightening. They were a lot closer in age to me then than they are now. Portrait of Dorian Gray, only in reverse. Julian and Peter never age, but I do.
And you're beautiful. There's
So
there's
are
no
you.
ugly portrait here.
Thank you. Thank you. I have transformed, but I've certainly aged as well. But when I first started working with them, I mean, they were like, Julian in particular, although I'm a lot more like Peter, honestly, was an alter ego. And so I grew up in that time period. And so I kind of was living the life that I would have lived if I had been allowed to be the gender that I am now for my whole life. Although I
Wow.
didn't know that's what I was doing at the time.
Wow.
So, so I've always been sort of trying to reconstruct an alternate history of my life through Julian and Peter. And some of it I just remembered from things that I had done, like being at the Natural History Museum, for example, or some of the music or some of the historical events that made an impression on me when I was in my 20s. And some of it I had to Google to see, like, did that movie come out then? Or, what
Wow.
kind of, were there cell phones? Because I'm not an early adopter of technology. So I would not have known if there were cell phones in 1997. I would not have had one. So some of it I did have to research. And it does make it a lot easier when you're in the internet era to be able to reconstruct a time period. But I did want to give it that flavor because the politics of the book, the issues of the book, which involve repressed memory and child abuse and feminism, and is there a place for male survivors in the survivor movement of the time, which was very woman centric. All of that is a very 90s kind of set of questions. So I really wanted to give it that flavor.
Well, was it your intent to give, in a way, a portrait of the 90s? Was it your specific intent to, was that was it a character in the novel, as far as you're concerned?
I think it probably ended up being. I think it was just more to give it a three-dimensional kind of real situatedness rather than to comment on the 90s as such. But I
Okay.
think it probably ended up being that way. I'm glad you feel that it was so immersive.
It was really powerful, I have to say.
Well, I enjoyed the fact that Oho is set a little bit before AIDS becomes the dominant subject of gay life because it had that sort of utopian dreamlike quality that I certainly have no personal experience of for so many
Mhm.
reasons, but I think whether you've lived through it or not, I think people look back to that and think like that was that brief moment between complete closetedness and AIDS when the world just seemed like the world of your book just burgeoning with secret queerness that's going to just come through if you just turn over a rock and there's Tommy.
But I also wanted to show the transition into HIV
Mhm.
because, as we know, it rears its head right at the
Yeah.
end.
Yeah.
And my husband and I lived through that time, and we had quite an extended family in Denver where we lived at the time, and we're the only two alive today out of a couple dozen people. So I wanted to talk about what it was like to lose, to be rejected by your family, and then also be rejected by, I'm not be rejected by, but then to go and lose all of your extended family to, or your not your extended, but your chosen family to a disease that basically people were petrified about. I call it the first pandemic. People think COVID was the first pandemic that we know about in the last 100 years, but really, if you were queer in the 80s, that was a pandemic, and it's still around today in deadly ways, right?
Yeah.
And from what I understand, the COVID vaccine, my brother-in-law actually was just telling me this recently, that his brother was part of um, doing research to come up with a vaccine for HIV and AIDS. And the very research they did on HIV and AIDS is the one that was used to turn out a COVID vaccine within a year. But if it were not for the all the work they did on HIV and AIDS, the techniques they came up with, that would not have been possible.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Thanks for
Well,
sharing that. That's very
Yeah,
fascinating.
it is.
with so many different dimensions to both your works, and as well as so many common threads. And I know one of the things you had both talked about was, fluidity in many different levels, not only from, gender, but also, even with the structure of your writing, it kind of reflects sort of kind of not getting caught in the box of definitions for anything, and that it seems like that's part of your work also. I wondered if you had any thoughts on that, if that rings true or not for you.
Jendi?
Or yeah, the structure of Origin Story is a bit more experimental than Two Natures, which was a straightforward first person narration by Julian. And if you like Julian, there's more Julian to be had, so go get him. But Origin Story was designed to be fragmented because Peter is trying to put his fragmented psyche together, and so it includes fictitious texts interspersed with the narration, and that was very intentionally meant to be sort of the detective work that he's doing to figure out the history of his own life from the archives, just like the queer archives require detective work to piece together the histories that are not told to us in the mainstream. So too is I think the history of being a trauma survivor, where no one's going to come out and tell you that this stuff happened to you, that you have to put together the clues that what's not being told. So that's why I structure it that way. So it has emails, it has correspondence, it has fictitious book excerpts, diary entries, all kinds of stuff like that, and even a couple of sections by Julian himself, because he's irrepressible and will not let me get through a book without having a scene that he narrates.
All
For
of
me,
it, I have to say, was required a very creative and engaged book designer.
Yes, Don, you
who
put up
loved
with
the
my
book.
17 typefaces and narrow them down to about 4. I love you.
Same here.
Do I have audio?
You
Yeah,
do.
Oh, okay. Well, the funniest thing that I remember was with Jendi and I going back and forth. What is a chapter? What is a chapter? And finally we decided a chapter, a chapter is the thing that starts with a drop cap. That's a chapter.
arbitrary definition right there.
I mean,
Very
we go
philosophical
back and
questions.
forth. When Don and I went back and forth, it was usually, fixing things out, making small changes. But when Jenny and I were going back and forth, it was the kind of thing we've just been talking about. Like, what do we got here anyway? How shall we set off the letters, or what font shall we use for the emails? Stuff like that. It was a lot of fun, but it was.
You get two typeface nerds together.
And it worked. It worked in both novels. We both have the the dancing of fonts
That's
throughout.
true. That's
Yeah.
right.
I
Because you
knew
have
it too,
Florey's
Don. That's
letters
right.
and so forth.
For
Yeah.
me, in terms of the structure, it comes, I think, from two places. One of my favorite novels is Tristram Shandy, and it's an 18th century novel, and the author, who's I can't believe his name has escaped
Stern,
my.
is it?
Lord Stern.
That's it, Lawrence Stern. Thank you so much. One of my favorite novels in the world, and he talks in there about how. And we know how that is, right? We know how Tristram Shandy is structurally, and he talks in there about how he wants to make sure that his reader is basically there all along. And if he were to explain everything, the reader would take breaks or would go on vacations or whatever, and would not need to be engaged. But so long as he's putting gaps in the text, the reader has to stay, right? Of course, they could just walk away and say, screw it. And I always loved that. I think it was, oh my goodness, it was one of the first books I read when I got to graduate school. The other thing is Emily Dickinson, who said, "Tell all the truth, but tell it slant." And you know, given that I feel like my life has been slant in so many ways, and especially having lived in the closet for so many years, one thing you learn in the closet is never to tell anything straight. First of all, you can't tell anything straight. And second of all, for lots of reasons. And second of all, you know, you just know you've got to find a way to go around telling the thing. And I think it's just a, a disposition that I developed over time, having lived in the closet all those years. So it just feels right for me. I don't think I'm able to write any other way. I dream about it, but I just seem incapable of it.
Don, that is a question I was going to ask you about the book, and because my experience of it was I had to read it more closely than I normally read a book, and more slowly, because I couldn't always figure out what was going on.
Well, the same thing with
And
this, I
so,
have to say, it was the same thing.
see, I can
Yeah.
always understand my own book. Actually, that's not true. I can't. But so, I'm glad I had to read it, because I might not have made myself work hard enough to get this amazing experience that I got of really just letting myself flow
Mhm.
with hearing it, and just like, okay, I feel the scene. I remember these scenes more. The scenes were going to stick with me more because I had to read it so closely to get the gist of how the book was structured and who the characters were. And then after a while, it was like second nature to me, because I understood it. A book that reminds me of is Ridley Walker by
Uh-huh.
Russell Hoban,
Yeah.
which is another very strange experimental novel that I adore. Those of you who know Russell Hoban from Bread and Jam for Francis, the children's picture books, he also wrote these really bonkers post-apocalyptic kind of experimental novels with their own language. That's I loved that book because once you're in it, you're in it. And similarly with yours. So yeah,
And
it's
the
Tristan Shandy. He's right.
same
Yeah.
with yours. I oftentimes at the beginning thought, okay, where are we going here? Who are we? Who
Mhm.
are these people? And I thought, you know, enjoy the language, enjoy the language, enjoy the language. And then, like in the same way, it came to me. But one thing I want to say is that that kind of writing, from my perspective, is not a one and doneer. That kind of writing creates a desire to revisit a text or to reread it, or you know, to go back and sort of plumb its depths. You know, uh, I'm ready to reread now Origin Story.
Yeah.
So that's the beauty of it from my
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah.
You
Yeah, it's
know,
something I rarely have the opportunity to do anymore, is to reread books.
yeah, but it's, yeah. I'm going to have to, I think, begin to, or at least ask you all to sort of have any last things you'd like us to talk about. Um,
We'd
because
love to
I
hear
think
questions from the
we
audience,
are
I guess,
kind
if
of
there's
running
any.
over here, and I don't want people to have to um, break off. So,
Does anyone in the audience have any questions, comments, objections, suggestions for book 3?
I just want to say how much I enjoyed hearing the two of you talk together about each other's work in such depth. So that was a highlight.
Thanks.
Would
Thank you.
agree. That was for me too. I think
Fun
that's
to do.
really is rare that we get to hear that kind of conversation, and that's really lovely. Yeah.
Thank you. I admire Jendi's work.
Yeah.
Likewise, I'm looking forward to Bear Life.
Me too.
One year.
Yes,
We
when
were
does it come
laughing.
out?
Inspiring us all
The
to
lead
read.
in Oho came out within a couple of days of a year between them, September 2023, September 2024. So look for the next one in September 2025.
No, maybe sooner
Okay.
than that, but
They
anyway.
have something to look forward to in 2025.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thank you all. I just
Oh, I'm
really
sorry.
liked it. So,
I'm sorry, Phil, go ahead.
I
I'm
just
sorry.
was saying, I really loved hearing them. I agree. Talking about each other's work, that really inspires me to read more of the work. So, you know, and just to get a better perspective of the larger dimensions of the work and the kind of reach that it has. Donald, you're talking about just representing characters that need to be represented. I think is hugely important, fundamental, and I thank you for that.
Thank you.
And Jenny, as I said before, I love the Yiddish in your
thank you.
for my poetry, I try to use as many Yiddish words as I've learned from my parents. So
I'm gonna have to read some more of that.
so
A little
thank you.
nostalgia for New York there.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was a really rich conversation, and that was sort of not pre-planned, and it was, really helped me get deeper into the world of each of your books, because of the insights that you both have into the work that each other's work. That was really fascinating. So really appreciate being able to be a part of that. And I just had one other quick question, because I know when we were talking before, a lot of the themes that we addressed came up, but one word came up that didn't get talked about today, which and it was intriguing to me, and we didn't have a chance to talk about it then. But the word theology came up as a very central part of how you view your works, and I just wanted to have I know it's not fair to say a quick response to that, but time being on the wing, whatever you would wish to say about that, because I was intrigued and wanted to know how that related to you.
John, why don't you
Jendy,
take that? You want to take that one first? Because I can go on forever, and then you
I
won't have
could
any
too.
time.
I'll make mine quick.
Okay.
Well, it's hard to live in this country, which I consider a Puritan country, and a specific kind of Christian country, whether I like it or not. And despite all the talk about all the, what are they called? No seds or I forget what they call people who call themselves non-religious or non-theological or whatever. Even though they say that number is growing, we still see in every election really the role of religion and the way really that Protestantism and Catholicism too. I mean, 6 Supreme Court judges are Catholic. The way that has in our lives and the role that has in the lives, especially of queer people, in the silencing of queer people and not just the making invisible of queer people and the desire really to wipe us off the map. It's hard not to have that in your life without responding to it. And so it's a very big part of Oho. The whole second half really is about the role of fundamentalism in America and how you negotiate a queer sensibility in the middle of that. And it's a theme throughout the entire trilogy that I've written, and especially I don't want to say too much, but it's especially a theme in the third one, but from a completely different perspective. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Jendi.
Thank you. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to that. And once again, I second what you say about the difficulty living in this country as a queer person with a certain kind of religion being forced upon us. And origin story was, among many other things, an attempt for me as someone who was raised Reformed, secular-ish Jewish and went through sort of Christian conversion and now ex-Christian, to grapple with whether the Hebrew Bible and whether the Bible in general can really be trauma sensitive and on the side of the child survivor as opposed to the authoritarian parent. And largely, I think the book concludes no, but nonetheless, Peter has a relationship with his Judaism that he's trying to reclaim, and Julian, in his own way, also very much struggling with his Christian upbringing, yet longing for transcendence. So I wanted both of them by the end of the book to be on a path towards salvaging what they can from their traditions, but not being enthralled to them. But it's a very difficult struggle, just as it is in real life for a lot of us to do that.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean we're not spiritual.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean a lot of things, right? Nature for me is God. So the minute I walk in nature, I'm communing with God. It doesn't mean we're not spiritual, but it's a different kind of theology, I guess.
Well, that shows, I think, in that passage you read about the rock being alive. I thought that was so amazing. And the trees, like the pubic hair, it's like the trees are like this, the earth is like this sexy body that Jake is tapping into when he gets away from his repressive suburb. And I thought that was just amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Peter and I are Jewish witches now.
Oh, cool.
Jewish pagans,
I don't know that.
Judeo-Christian pagans or something. So we
cool.
queer religion in our own ways, right?
There you go.
Yeah, thickest pubic hair stands out for me too. That's great. Should we end with that?
Yes, we can't top that one.
Great.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that next month, we have Amy Holman, who's here, and Dane Servine, who's here. And I'm really hoping, thanks, Dane, for holding
Nice
up the
covers.
books. I really hope that we'll talk about it, but I hope that you talk with one another like this.
Yeah,
This is
Dane,
really inspiring as a way to do it. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I would like a Zoom with drinks, actually, and just to get to know each other.
why not?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sunday, 3 o'clock martini hour. How about that?
But it doesn't need to be, I'm drinking alcohol free these days. Yeah, but whatever we want, right?
Whatever.
Well, Don doesn't drink, but we could still have the spirit of it.
There
Spirit
you go.
of spirits.
the
Or we
spirit
could
of
just have the
spirits.
Saddle Road
Yes.
Press gathering that we've talked about so much. Everybody
That
comes.
too.
That's right. Well,
That
thank
too.
you. And Phil, I'll let you say goodbye to everyone
Oh, goodbye, everyone.
I mean, you're our
Goodbye.
moderator
Thank you
today.
so much.
Bye.
Wonderful to
Thank
get to
you
know
all.
better.
It's
It's
such a
wonderful.
treat.
Thank you all for
Thank you
coming.
so
and
much.
Thank you for, yeah.
Very
See you next
Ruth and
month.
Don.
wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks for everything.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.